Long ago, in the great Uzo kingdom, there was a princess named Obianuju. She was the only daughter of King Ezioka, a ruler known for his wisdom and wealth. From the moment she was born, she was adored by her parents, showered with the finest jewelry, clothes, and food fit for royalty. But as the years passed, Obianuju grew bigger and bigger, her body filling out beyond what was considered beautiful for a princess. In the Uzo kingdom, a princess was expected to be slim and graceful, like the river maidens who danced at festivals. But Obianuju was different. She was not only large, but also incredibly strong, stronger than many men in the kingdom. Her laughter was loud, her footsteps heavy, and when she clapped her hands, it sounded like thunder. She was kind-hearted and intelligent, but the one thing that overshadowed everything else was her size. When she reached the age of marriage, her father sent messengers across the land, announcing that any prince who wished to marry Obianuju would be welcomed with open arms. But there was one condition: the man must truly love her and see her as beautiful. One by one, suitors came from different kingdoms, drawn by King Ezioka's riches. But the moment they saw Obianuju, their smiles would fade. Some made weak excuses and left hurriedly. Others openly laughed, whispering among themselves, "How can I marry a woman who looks like a wrestler? If she sits on me, I will die. No amount of gold is worth this." Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and still, no prince was willing to marry her. The court grew tense. The queen, worried for her daughter's future, begged the king to lower the standard. "Husband, let us offer more gold, more land, anything to make them agree." But King Ezioka shook his head. "A husband who marries her for riches will never love her. I will not curse my daughter with a life of sorrow." Meanwhile, Obianuju began to feel the weight of rejection. She sat in her chambers, staring at her reflection in the polished bronze mirror. "Am I truly that undesirable?" she whispered to herself. One evening, during the grand New Yam festival, an unexpected visitor arrived at the palace. He was not a prince, nor was he a man of great title. But when he saw Obianuju, his eyes did not widen in shock or disgust. Instead, he smiled. And that was the beginning of something no one in Uzo Kingdom could have predicted. The visitor was a warrior named Ikena. He was not a prince, but he was well known across the land for his strength and courage. His name carried weight in many kingdoms. He had fought in great battles, tamed wild beasts, and even won wrestling matches against men twice his size. Yet, despite his fame, he was a simple man who cared little for gold or royal titles. Ikena had come to the New Yam festival to pay his respects to King Ezioka, unaware of the rumors surrounding Princess Obianuju. But when he saw her sitting on the royal throne, adorned in coral beads and a flowing wrapper of the finest silk, he did not see what others saw. He did not see a woman who was too fat, too heavy, or too different. He saw a queenly figure, a woman whose presence filled the room with power. As the festival began, drummers played their talking drums, dancers twirled in the moonlight, and wrestlers gathered in the open arena to prove their strength. Ikena, being a warrior, was soon invited to join in the wrestling contest. He stepped into the ring, defeating one challenger after another. The crowd cheered as he threw down even the strongest of Uzo's warriors. Then, to everyone's shock, Princess Obianuju stood up. "Ikena," she called out, her voice bold and clear. "Let me wrestle you." A hush fell over the crowd. The queen gasped, the king raised an eyebrow, and the suitors who had once mocked Obianuju exchanged uneasy glances. "Princess, I cannot fight you," Ikena said, bowing slightly. "You are royalty." "I am also strong," she replied, stepping forward. "And I wish to prove it." The crowd murmured. Some laughed, expecting the princess to embarrass herself. Others were simply curious. Could a woman, especially one so large, truly challenge a warrior like Ikena? The drums began again, slow and rhythmic. Ikena hesitated, but he saw the determination in Obianuju's eyes. With a respectful nod, he stepped into the ring. Obianuju was fast for her size. When Ikena tried to grab her, she slipped past him, her movements graceful yet powerful. When he lunged again, she caught his arm and twisted it in a way that made the crowd gasp. She was strong, stronger than anyone had ever realized. But Ikena was no ordinary warrior. He quickly adjusted, matching her strength with his own skill. The two struggled, their bodies locked in a battle of endurance. The ground shook as they moved, the dust rising into the air. Minutes passed. Then, in one swift move, Obianuju lifted Ikena off his feet. The entire arena erupted into shocked cries. And then, she let go. Not to slam him down, but to prove her point. Breathing heavily, she stepped back and looked him in the eyes. "I do not need to win," she said. "I only needed you to see me for who I am." Ikena did see her. Not just as a princess, not just as a large woman, but as someone worthy of respect. He took a deep breath, then did something no one expected. He knelt before her. And the entire kingdom watched as a warrior humbled himself before the fat princess of Yuzo. A stunned silence filled the air. Never before had a man, let alone a warrior, knelt before a woman in such a way. The suitors who once mocked Obianuju watched in disbelief. The queen covered her mouth in shock. The king, his eyes sharp with curiosity, leaned forward on his throne. Then Ikena spoke. "Princess Obianuju," he said, his deep voice steady, "you are unlike any woman I have ever met. You are strong, bold, and fearless. You do not beg for approval, you demand it. And now I see that those who rejected you were fools." A murmur swept through the crowd. "Do not kneel before me," Obianuju said, her voice softer now. "I do not seek pity." "This is not pity," Ikena replied, standing up. "This is respect." The words hit Obianuju like a drumbeat in her chest. Respect. Not mockery. Not rejection. Respect. For the first time in years, she felt seen, not for her size, not for her difference, but for the woman she truly was. But before she could say another word, the king rose from his throne. "This is an interesting night indeed," he said, his voice carrying across the arena. His piercing eyes settled on Ikena. "You are no prince, yet you kneel before my daughter as if you are worthy of her. Tell me, warrior, do you seek her hand in marriage?" A hush fell over the gathering. All eyes turned to Ikena. He could have said no. He could have laughed it off and walked away like the others. But he did not. Instead, he stepped closer to Obianuju, looking her directly in the eyes. "If she would have me," he said, "I would be honored." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. No man had ever spoken such words about Obianuju before. The queen clutched her chest. The rejected suitors shifted uncomfortably. The king's face was unreadable. And Obianuju? Her heart pounded like the royal drums. "Ikena," she said carefully, "you do not even know me." "I know enough," he replied. "I know that you are more than your body. I know that you are a woman of strength, of courage. And that is more than any prince has bothered to see." Tears pricked at the corners of Obianuju's eyes, not of sadness, but of something she had not felt in a long time. Hope. But the king was not done. He turned to the crowd, his voice commanding. "This man claims to see the worth of my daughter. But talk is cheap." He looked back at Ikena. "If you are truly serious, you must prove it. You must pass the 3 trials of Yuzo." A stir spread through the gathering. The 3 trials were ancient tests given only to the bravest warriors, tasks that could mean life or death. Ikena did not flinch. He met the king's gaze and nodded. "Tell me the trials, and I will face them." Obianuju opened her mouth to protest. She had waited so long to be seen, but now that a man had finally stepped forward, her father was putting him in danger. The king raised his hand, silencing her. The first trial, he declared, is the hunt of the shadow beast. The people gasped. The shadow beast was a creature that roamed the deep forest beyond Yuzo Kingdom. Many warriors had tried to slay it, but none had returned. The second trial, the king continued, is the climb of the Whispering Mountain. You must reach the peak and return with the feather of the sacred eagle that nests at the top. And then the king's eyes darkened. The final trial, he said, is the test of true intentions. But you will learn what that means only if you survive the first two. A heavy silence followed. Everyone knew these trials were deadly. Akena's expression did not change. He turned to Obianuju and spoke only one sentence. For you, I will face them all. And with those words, he sealed his fate. The palace was buzzing with whispers long after the festival ended. Had Akena truly meant what he said? Would he survive the 3 trials of Yuzo? Or was he like the others, pretending to care until the challenge became too great? Obianuju could not sleep that night. She stood by her window, staring at the moonlit courtyard below. What if he dies, she thought. What if he is just another man who wants to prove his strength and nothing more? But deep down, she knew something was different about Akena. He had not looked at her with disgust. He had not spoken to her with pity. He had seen her. And that terrified her. At dawn, Akena stood before the palace gates, armed with only a spear and a dagger. The king, the queen, and the entire kingdom gathered to witness his departure. Obianuju stood beside her father, watching in silence. The shadow beast lurks in the forbidden forest, the king announced. It has terrorized our hunters for years. Slay it and bring back its heart. Without hesitation, Akena nodded and set off toward the dark forest. The deeper he went, the thicker the trees became, their twisted branches blocking out the sunlight. The air smelled of damp earth and something else, something rotten. Then he saw them. Bones. Scattered across the ground. Skulls of animals and men. A low growl rumbled through the trees. Akena turned just in time to see a massive creature step out of the shadows. The shadow beast was unlike anything he had ever faced. Its body was covered in thick black fur, its eyes glowed like red embers, and its fangs were as long as daggers. The beast let out a deafening roar and lunged at him. Akena barely dodged in time, rolling to the side as the beast's claws slashed through the air. He struck with his spear, but the weapon barely pierced its hide. The beast was fast, too fast. Then he noticed something. The beast hesitated whenever it stepped into a patch of sunlight. It fears the light, he realized. Using his surroundings, Akena lured the beast into an open clearing where the first rays of morning sun broke through the trees. As the light touched its fur, the beast shrieked and recoiled. That was his chance. With all his strength, Akena drove his spear into the beast's throat. It let out one final roar before collapsing, blood soaking the ground beneath it. Breathing heavily, Akena took his dagger and cut out its heart. The first trial was complete. When Akena returned to the palace with the shadow beast's heart, the people gasped. He had done what no man before him could. But the king did not look impressed. The second trial begins now, he declared. Akena was given no time to rest. He was sent straight to Whispering Mountain, the tallest peak in the land. The task? To climb it and bring back the feather of the sacred eagle that nested at its peak. The climb was brutal. The wind howled like spirits warning him to turn back. The rocks were jagged and loose, and more than once, his foot slipped, nearly sending him plummeting to his death. As he climbed higher, he began to hear whispers, voices calling his name, tempting him. Go back, Akena. You will never succeed. She is not worth it. No woman is worth your life. Turn back before it is too late. The voices clawed at his mind, but he gritted his teeth and kept going. He had come too far to give up now. After hours of climbing, he reached the peak. There, perched on a lone tree, was the sacred eagle, a magnificent bird with golden feathers that shimmered in the sunlight. Ikenna slowly approached. The eagle watched him with piercing eyes, as if measuring his soul. Then, without warning, it spread its wings and took flight, leaving behind a single feather. With the feather in hand, Ikenna began his descent. By the time he returned to Yuzo Kingdom, he was bruised, bleeding, and exhausted. Yet, he stood tall as he presented the feather to the king. The crowd erupted in cheers. But Obianuju saw something deeper in his eyes, not just strength, but determination. He had truly done this for her. Only one trial remained. The king stood from his throne. You have proven your strength and bravery, he said. But the final trial is not one of battle or endurance. It is a test of your heart. Ikenna frowned. What must I do? The king clapped his hands, and 2 guards stepped forward, holding a small wooden box. In this box is your final choice, the king said. You may open it and accept what is inside, or you may walk away. A tense silence filled the court as Ikenna slowly lifted the lid. Inside the box was a royal decree. It stated that if Ikenna married Obianuju, he would be king, but only if he agreed never to touch her. A stunned murmur spread through the crowd. Obianuju's heart pounded. She turned to her father, eyes blazing with anger. Father, what is the meaning of this? It is simple, the king replied. Many men desire power. Many claim to love, but love fades when the body does not please. If Ikenna truly values you, he will take this marriage without the pleasures of a husband. If not, he may leave now. Would Ikenna accept a life of duty without love? Would he choose power over passion? Or would he turn away, proving that, like all the others, he did not truly see Obianuju for who she was? Ikenna looked at the paper, then at Obianuju. Then, he made his choice. A heavy silence filled the palace courtyard. The royal decree lay in Ikenna's hands, its meaning clear. He could marry Obianuju and become king, but he could never touch her as a husband. The crowd whispered, waiting for his answer. Obianuju clenched her fist, her heart pounding. Would he leave? Would he prove to be like the others, fascinated by the challenge but unwilling to truly love her? Ikenna's hands tightened around the decree. Then, without hesitation, he tore it in half. Gasps erupted from the crowd. The queen's eyes widened. Even the king's face darkened in surprise. I do not need a piece of paper to tell me how to love my wife, Ikenna declared, his voice strong. If I marry Obianuju, it will not be because of power or duty. It will be because I choose her, fully and completely. The whispers grew louder. Some were shocked by his defiance, others murmured in admiration. But Obianuju only stared at him, her breath caught in her throat. Why, she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why would you risk everything for me? Ikenna stepped closer, his gaze never wavering. Because from the moment I saw you, I knew you were more than what people said, he said. They see only your body, but I see your strength, your mind, your fire. I see a woman who has been denied love, not because she is unworthy, but because the men around her were too small to handle her greatness. Tears welled in Obianuju's eyes. I do not want a throne, Ikenna continued. I do not want riches. I want you. But only if you will have me. A stunned hush fell over the kingdom. The suitors who had once mocked her now looked at the ground in shame. The queen's lips trembled as she fought back tears. And the king? For the first time that night, he smiled. He stepped forward and placed a hand on Ikenna's shoulder. You have passed the final trial. Ikena frowned. But I rejected your test. The king chuckled. That was the test. Any man can chase power. Any man can desire a throne. But a man who chooses love, even when it cost him everything, that is a man worthy of my daughter. The entire kingdom erupted into cheers. Drums roared, voices sang, and the celebration began at once. But in the midst of the noise, Obianuju looked at Ikena, and for the first time in her life, she smiled, not to hide pain, not to seem strong, but because she had finally been chosen. That night, under the stars, Obianuju and Ikena were wed. And when she danced, she did not care who watched, who judged, or who whispered. She danced freely, knowing that she was loved, not for what she could become, but for who she already was. And thus, the fat princess of Yuzo became the Queen of Hearts, remembered not for her size, but for the love story that changed the kingdom forever.